Presenting our podcast, Got Milk, the Indian Dairy Context, brought to you by Shunya Agritech, India's first animal nutrition and well-being focused organization. Say hello to your hosts, Gear and Sahil.
Okay, so you're really looking to understand India's dairy industry, right?
Yeah.
But you want to get a clear picture without wading through tons and tons of information.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what we're doing today, a deep dive into
Indian dairy.
And to make sure we've got all the angles covered, we've gathered a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah.
Research papers, of course.
Of course.
Official data from the government, reports from different organizations, even online statistics.
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive.
It is. And that's the point, to give you a really solid understanding of how this whole sector works.
A good overview.
Exactly.
I like it.
So our mission today
Okay.
is to really pull out those crucial insights about Indian dairy,
Yeah.
where it's been, where it is now, what's holding it back, and how it fits into the global picture.
The whole picture.
The whole picture. So let's start by rewinding a bit.
Okay.
Because it wasn't always this powerhouse of milk production, was it?
No, not at all. In fact, back in the 50s and 60s, India actually had milk shortages.
Seriously?
Yeah, production was really low. It's hard to imagine now, considering they're the world's biggest producer.
Yeah, that's a huge turnaround.
It is.
So that's where these dairy cooperatives come in, right? Yeah. And things like the Sanan pattern and Operation Flood.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a bit about why those were such game changers?
Well, it's really interesting how a certain way of organizing things can lead to such big changes. Yeah. So the National Dairy Development Board, the NDDB, was set up in 1970.
Okay.
But it was the Anand pattern of dairy cooperatives that really got things moving. And Dr. Verghese Kurian was the driving force behind that.
I've heard that name.
Yeah. And it wasn't just about making more milk. This was about farmers owning the cooperatives, having professional management, a system that linked everything from production to processing to selling, So it really empowered people in rural areas and laid the groundwork for this milk revolution.
It's amazing to think that just a few decades later, in 1988, India overtook the U.S. as the biggest milk producer.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and this isn't just some new thing. Dairy's been a core part of India's rural economy for a long time.
Absolutely. Dairy farming is so deeply rooted in Indian agriculture.
Right.
And on a global scale, India produces something like 17% of all milk in the world.
Wow.
That shows you how massive this industry really is.
So bringing us up to speed, now we know India's top dog when it comes to production, but what are the numbers actually looking like?
Well, based on 2021 data from the FAO, India produced a whopping 208,984,430 tons of milk.
Good Lord.
Which makes them the clear leader globally.
Wow, but they must have huge demand as well, right?
They do. Consumption's really high, too.
Yeah.
In 2024, it's projected to be around 121,495,000 metric tons.
Wow, that's a lot of milk.
Which makes them the second largest consumer globally.
So who's number one?
The European Union just edges them out, but it still highlights the massive domestic market in India for milk and dairy products.
And I read that the amount of milk each person has access to has been steadily going up.
Yeah, that's right. Back in 1970, it was about 112 grams per day.
Okay.
By 2014, it was 355 grams.
Wow.
And by 2022-23, a very impressive 459 grams a day.
That's more than doubled in just over a decade.
And what's really significant is that it's now higher than the global average.
That's a huge climb. And the rate at which production is growing is way faster than the global average, too, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. India's milk production is growing at about 6.3% per year.
Wow.
Compared to a global rate of around 1.5%.
Big difference.
And looking ahead, the forecast for 2024 is for 212.7 million metric tons of fluid milk production.
So they're expecting that growth to continue.
Definitely.
Something I found interesting was the shift in where that milk's coming from.
Oh, yeah.
It seems cows are now outproducing buffaloes.
You're right. There's been a real change there in the 2020-21 fiscal year. Cow milk made up 51% of the total.
Wow, over half.
Overtaking buffalo milk, which was at 45%.
Interesting. And that probably impacts the types of dairy products they're making, too. So we've got this massive production and consumption, but what about the industry itself?
Yeah.
Who are the big players? Is it all huge corporations?
It's actually a mix. You definitely have your national and international companies, especially for things like cheese and processed foods.
Okay.
But the real backbone, at least for collecting milk and supporting farmers, is these village milk producer cooperatives and district cooperative milk producers unions.
Right. So these are organizations
Yeah.
that are really crucial for gathering the milk from all these small farms.
Yeah, and they provide important services too, like animal feed and veterinary health.
So it's a grassroots network feeding into this larger commercial system.
I got it.
And there's a difference between the organized and unorganized sectors too, right?
Yeah, so the organized sector is made up of the cooperatives and the private dairy companies.
Okay.
The cooperatives are the big players for liquid milk. They handle about 90% of the milk they collect as liquid, and they've got about 60% of the market share.
So they're dominating that part?
They are private dairies, on the other hand, are more into processing.
Okay, so making things like butter and yogurt and...
Exactly. Things like that. They use about 80% of the milk they collect for processing.
So two different focuses.
Yeah.
But it seems like the organized sector is going to become even more important for milk production in the future.
That's what the projections show. They're expecting it to jump from about 30% to maybe 65% by 2021-22.
Wow, that's a huge increase.
It is, and it shows how things are moving towards more formalized processing and adding value.
Right, and this whole value-added product thing, that seems to be a major driver of growth, isn't it?
It is. As people's incomes rise and more people move to cities,
Yeah.
we're seeing a bigger demand for a wider range of dairy products, not just milk.
Beyond the basic.
Exactly. For example, demand for cheese in India is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of over 20% between 2020 and 2025.
That's a lot of cheese.
A lot of cheese, and overall, the market for value-added dairy items like flavored milk, yogurt, cheese is expected to grow by about 13% to 15% every year.
Wow, that's huge growth. And with such a big industry, the government must be pretty involved, right?
Oh yeah, they've launched several schemes to support the dairy industry.
So what are some of the key initiatives they've got going?
Well, one big one is the Dairy Processing and Infrastructure Development Fund.
Okay.
This is all about upgrading milk processing plants and chilling infrastructure.
All right.
They even offer a 2.5% interest subsidy on loans. And there's a lot of money committed to this.
So they're really serious about improving infrastructure.
Definitely. Another major initiative is the Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund, or AHIDF.
Okay, another fund.
Yeah, and this one's got a massive outlay of 15,000 crore rupees.
Wow.
And it aims to boost processing capacity for both milk and meat.
Okay.
The goal is to raise farmers' incomes and increase exports.
Right.
They even have a 3% interest subvention to make borrowing cheaper.
So that's direct financial help for developing infrastructure. But are there programs specifically for improving production and quality on the farms themselves?
Yes, definitely the National Program for Dairy Development, or NPDD.
Okay, NPD.
That one is all about boosting the quality of milk and dairy products and getting milk producers more involved in the value chain.
Okay, so supporting them at every stage.
Exactly. They provide money to set up and improve infrastructure for testing quality and chilling facilities at the village level.
So starting right at the source.
Yeah.
It's great that they're focusing on everything from the farm to the processing plant.
Mm.
But what about cold storage and food safety all along the supply chain?
Well, that's covered by the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, or PMKSY.
Okay, PMKSY.
And they've extended this scheme all the way to March 2026,
Okay.
with a good chunk of funding allocated.
So it must be important.
It covers developing infrastructure for cold chains, processing facilities, and food safety measures.
Right, making sure everything's handled properly.
And they estimate it'll create lots of jobs in the sector, too.
So win-win, and for the farmers themselves, access to credit must be super important.
It's crucial. The Kisan credit card scheme has been expanded to include animal husbandry farmers,
Okay.
so they can get affordable and timely access to working capital and credit for investments.
So they can keep their operations running and growing.
Exactly, and millions of these Kisan credit cards have been given out to dairy farmers.
So it's really making a difference. And what about improving the livestock itself, their quality and productivity?
Well, there's the Rashtriya Gokul mission, which focuses on boosting the productivity of native Indian breeds
Okay.
to increase overall milk production.
So they're not just focusing on any cows.
No, they want to support the local breeds.
Okay.
They give financial help for things like breeding programs, using sex-sorted semen to get more female calves,
Smart.
and even in vitro fertilization or IVF programs.
So high-tech stuff too.
Yes. And then there's the National Livestock Mission, which is broader. It aims to promote entrepreneurship and improve breed quality across all livestock, not just dairy.
Okay.
And that includes things like better feed and fodder.
So it sounds like they're tackling this from all angles, even collaborating with private companies for technology.
Exactly. The government knows how important these scientific advancements are for better breeds and higher productivity.
Right.
So they're working with the private sector to make things like IVF more accessible to farmers.
So let's shift gears a bit and look at the global scene.
Okay.
We know India is the top milk producer, but how are they doing with exports?
This is where things get interesting, because even though they produce the most milk,
Yeah.
their share of global exports is actually pretty small, less than 1%.
Seriously?
Yeah, in 2022, global dairy imports were worth over $100 billion.
Okay.
And India's exports were just a tiny sliver of that.
So a big difference between what they make and what they sell internationally.
There is. So what are they exporting mainly?
Well, right now, the biggest chunk is butterfat,
Okay.
followed by milk powders and casein, which is a milk protein.
Right.
Cheese and paneer make up a smaller part of what they export.
So why aren't they a bigger player on the global market?
Well, there are a few reasons. One is that they use a lot of buffalo milk, which is different from cow milk for processing.
Okay.
They also don't have many large-scale facilities specifically for export, and their per-unit productivity is lower than some of the other big dairy exporting countries.
Okay.
And of course, a big chunk of their milk is consumed domestically.
Right. With such high demand at home.
Yeah, and then there are the quality and regulatory standards in developed countries, which can be pretty tough.
So lots of hurdles to overcome. It's
Yeah.
funny, though, because India used to actually be a net importer of dairy.
Yeah, that's right, in the 1990s.
Okay.
And again, between 2010 and 2012, mainly because demand at home was growing faster than production.
Makes sense, but they've turned that around.
They have in recent years. They become a net exporter in 2022-23. Their exports were worth over 2,269 crore rupees. That's a big achievement.
It is. So the potential's definitely there, even with the challenges.
So back on the home front, what's driving all this growth within India?
Several things. Their population is growing, and people have more disposable income, so naturally they want more dairy.
Yeah, the demand is there.
And those government programs like Operation Flood are still having a positive impact.
Right, building on that foundation.
Consumers are also shifting towards these value-added products, and technology is helping improve efficiency and productivity.
So it's a good news story overall, but it's not all rosy, is it?
No, there are definitely challenges.
What are some of the big ones that the industry needs to tackle?
Well, one of the main problems is that the sector is very fragmented. You have a lot of small-scale farmers,
Okay.
and that makes the supply chain less efficient, and their overall animal productivity is still lower than in other leading countries.
So they could be getting more out of each animal.
Exactly. And then you've got the high population density, both human and livestock, which puts a lot of pressure on land resources.
All right, they're competing for space.
And there are often shortages of good quality feed and fodder, and they need more technologies that are suited to tropical climates.
I see, so adapting to the local conditions.
And then there's the power supply, which can be unreliable, especially in rural areas.
That's got to be tough for processing and storage.
Definitely. So those are some pretty fundamental issues, but there are others too.
Like what?
Well, there needs to be more awareness and adoption of clean milk production practices on farms.
Okay, so hygiene and safety right from the start.
Exactly. And the infrastructure for collecting and chilling raw milk, especially in remote areas, needs to be improved.
So making sure it doesn't spoil.
Exactly. And then you have seasonal changes in milk production, regional differences in output,
Okay.
variations in milk quality depending on the animal species, and low productivity of both the cattle and the land they graze on.
Right, so it's not a uniform picture across the country.
No, and then there's limited access to capital for small farmers.
So they can't invest as much as they might need to.
Yeah, and there's a lack of good data for the sector, inconsistencies in how government programs are implemented.
Okay.
Not enough marketing options for producers, and just general infrastructure gaps.
So a whole bunch of interconnected challenges.
Yeah, it's a complex picture.
So you mentioned Karnataka earlier.
Yeah.
Why focus on that particular state?
Well, Karnataka gives us a really good regional example of what's happening nationally.
Okay.
They have a big dairy market worth over 1,000 billion rupees in 2023.
Wow, that's huge.
And it's expected to grow steadily,
Yeah.
and we're seeing that shift towards a more structured industry in Karnataka too.
Okay, like the national trend.
Exactly, and people there are also wanting more value-added dairy products.
So what are the main products they're selling?
Liquid milk is still the biggest seller,
Makes sense.
but there's a lot of ghee, which is clarified butter, curd, or yogurt, paneer, ice cream, all sorts of things.
So they've got a diverse range.
Yeah.
Are there any big names in Karnataka that really showcase this?
Oh, yeah. The Karnataka Milk Federation, or KMF, with their Nandini brand,
Okay.
they're a perfect example of a really successful dairy cooperative.
Interesting.
They have a long history. They offer loads of different products. And they're not just big in Karnataka.
Really?
They sell to neighboring states, too. Their finances have grown a lot over the years. And they're really important culturally in Karnataka.
So they're deeply rooted in the community.
They are. And they show how well the cooperative model can work and how much it can contribute to the economy.
Okay, so to wrap things up, we've covered a lot in this deep dive into India's dairy industry.
We have.
What are the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember?
Well, the main points are India's incredible journey from not having enough milk to being the biggest producer in the world. And that was largely thanks to the cooperative movement and ongoing government support.
Right.
And while domestic consumption is massive and still growing, India has some serious work to do to become a major player in global dairy exports.
Yeah, we talked about all those challenges.
But there's a lot of potential for the future with government support, technology adoption, and the growing demand for value-added products. And the Karnataka Milk Federation really shows what can be achieved.
A great example, and that's a fantastic summary of the scale and complexity of this whole industry.
It is complex.
It is. So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Given India's huge milk production and the growing demand at home, what do you think is the biggest thing holding them back from becoming a real powerhouse in the global dairy market while still making sure their own farmers are doing well and the industry is sustainable?
That's a tough question.
It is. It's about finding that balance between local needs and global opportunities.
Yeah.
We hope you've gotten a lot out of this deep dive, and we encourage you to dig deeper into any areas that sparked your interest.
Definitely, there's a lot more to explore.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Got Milk, the Indian Dairy Context. Subscribe to the podcast. And a reminder, this episode was brought to you by Shunya Agritech, India's first animal nutrition and well-being focused organization. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.